This variable goes here. Let's add this function right here. Refactor that function there. Get rid of that line over there. Optimize the algorithm over here and done. Confused? Allow me to explain. Until now, this YouTube channel was exclusively for Salesforce tutorial videos, but something incredible happened recently. I got motivated. Or you see, I reached deep down into the depths of my unfinished project graveyard, pulled out all the coffee and my will to live, and I got to work. Alright, so picture this. You want to create the perfect Spotify playlist, but the 10 or 30 minutes of work that would take seems like such a waste of time. So what do you do instead? Exactly. You spend a week remembering how to write some legible Python code and figure out how the Spotify API works to make this magnificent piece of work. But how did I actually implement this? Well, it's simple really. So let's pull up the code and go over how it works. Alright, so here's the code, and I know it looks kind of messy, you know, there is quite a bit of logic here, but most of that is just me because I haven't really done Python or used Flask or been in this kind of dev ecosystem in a few years. So I promise it's not too bad, and I'm sure this could have been written a lot better. And in fact, I'm going to probably put this up on GitHub so you guys can take a look at it and, you know, feel free to make it better or do some pull requests, fix my stuff, please. But anyways, so I think first off, we'll start by just kind of going over the app. And I think I've already spun up the Flask dev environment. So let's just kind of go ahead and just look to see what it looks like on our local host. And right here, it's pretty simple, right? Not much to it. It's has the name of our app, a little description of what it is, silly meme, why not? And yep, so basically it's very simple. I put almost no effort into the actual UI because it really all I wanted was just a quick way of creating a playlist. So you'll see here, basically the way it works is once you click on this nice little button right here, courtesy of Bootstrap, it will go into your Spotify account and it will look to see all the artists you follow, pick I think 5 or so songs from each of those artists, and then just dump it into a brand new playlist. So again, it's very simple. There's not much customizability to it, but you know, it works. And just to kind of go through it real quick, so let's just kind of get this a random name. So I'll just say like YouTuber test playlist or something. We'll hit this little button right here, and you'll see we're greeted with the Spotify page, and it's basically just to, you know, give permission to this application that we kind of are using. So in this case, I trust myself, I guess. So I'm going to just click on agree. Once I do that, you see here that it's pretty quick because this account that I made only follows one artist. So you'll see at the bottom, you know, well, to start with, we get a nice another nice little meme right here. But you'll see at the bottom it says we follow one artist, and it generated a playlist called this with 10 songs. And if I jump into my test Spotify account real quick, you'll see right here at the top, we indeed do have this playlist. Very quickly, I had made one earlier, but yeah, so you see here very quickly, let's just jump into my library. We are following just one artist, which happens to be Alice in Chains, and it went ahead and dumped 10 songs into it. So again, pretty simple. A quick backstory to this. Originally, I just wanted to create a very easy or very simple Python script that would basically do this here. But as it turns out, and we'll get into it, Spotify doesn't really make that simple, or at least I don't think it does. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to read the documentation correctly. But with that said, let's jump into documentation. So here is the Spotify for Developers documentation. I'm not going to read this in front of you guys because that'd be kind of boring. But we can kind of quickly gloss over the different authorizations or ways of authorizing yourself so you can use the API. The one I'm using, I believe it's this one, authorization code. And like I said earlier, I wanted basically just have a very simple script that I can kind of just, you know, run off the terminal or something that would basically create the playlist for me. But as it turns out, Spotify seems to have like this requirement where it has to show the user the permissions page, I guess you can call it. There is a way of just like getting authorized without having any of the user input, but as we can see somewhere right here, so basically for applications just running on the back end, you can make use of this client credentials, but there's this very important little detail right here that because it doesn't have user authentication, only endpoints that do not request user information can be accessed. And unfortunately, getting the user's artist is considered getting user information, so we can't really, make our Spotify dumb Python playlist work with this endpoint. So we have to use the authorization code. And all of that to say, it's not that complex. Basically just looks like this, right? It's a bunch of lines, but we kind of already went over it, right? So, we started here when we clicked on the little button. If I can go back here, when I clicked on this button, this basically sends off a request to Spotify. If the user has never authenticated with our app, it will bring up that Spotify prompt for the user to agree or not agree. Once they're logged in, then basically Spotify will kick us back a URL, which is like a redirect, which again, I'll kind of go into the code in much more detail, but this is like just a high level overview. Once we're redirected back to an endpoint that we specified, in the URL, there will be I believe a query parameter that contains the request access and some refresh tokens you see right here. Basically, we're going to use those to now make another or to actually make the calls that we want, and it kind of just can go in a loop. So I know I'm not explaining this very well, but that's because we're gonna go over it in the code anyways. So yeah, with that said, let's jump into it. So here is the code. I guess we'll just start at the beginning, right? So when you access the application, this is the route that it goes towards. And again, we're using Flask, which is just like a very lightweight web service thing that we can use. So when we go to our website for the first time, we are, just doing the / and we're doing a GET request. Essentially what's going to happen is we're just going to be shown the index.html page, which is in our templates right here. And if I do this, it's just a bunch of HTML with some conditional rendering. Not too important, but we can kind of dive into it in a little bit. But anyways, so yeah, it's just going to return that index.html page, which again is basically this right here. Whenever they click on this generate top hits playlist button, if we go into our HTML, which is right here, you'll see we have a form. And basically on submit, we have a show loading spinner, which was just that little image of a cat. I don't know if you guys caught it, but we can kind of just go over it really quick. So make another playlist. You see this little loading spinner cat, and I just put it there so the user can't click on the button and do more requests than while this is still processing. But anyways, so yeah, here's the form. There is an action, and the action is just to do, or rather go towards the endpoint, which is home, and it's a post this time. So if we go back here, again, this is still home. This is the function, but now we're doing a post. So because it's not a get, it goes towards this right here. And essentially we're getting the playlist name from that input we had, and I'm just storing it in a session very quickly. And after that, we are going to call this function right here, the get auth URL, and we're just redirecting back on it. In the get auth URL, if I can look for it, because it's been a while, right here, it's very simple. So here I'm just building up a URL with strings and stuff. So you see here, this is the URL for the authorized endpoint. Response type will be code, the client ID, which I kind of haven't gone into right now, but I'll do that right after this. So yeah, we get the client ID, and then here are the scopes, and scopes are basically the permissions that we're asking for, that the user will have to agree to. So here you see that we're going to read user private information, I guess, and the user email, and then being able to read the private playlist and modify private playlist and see who which artist the user's following. And once we have all of that, we're just returning the URL. So yeah, once we return the URL from that function right here, we're just doing a redirect, and basically that will our little Python program right here will kick off to that URL and let the user either authenticate, or rather give us permission to authenticate or not. If they deny it, I do have something to fall back on and show them that they didn't authenticate, so we can't do anything for them in terms of making them the playlist. But assuming that they did authenticate, here's the fun stuff. Once they give permission to our program to access their Spotify account, Spotify will automatically call this endpoint right here. And the reason for that is because, actually, let's just jump into the code or our dashboard real quick. So I am in the Spotify for Developers dashboard, and I had already created, this is the app we created. We just called it Playlist Generator. If we click on Edit Settings right here, you'll see there is this redirect URIs, and here it's just my local host, but it's / generate playlist. And basically when the user authenticates, or whether they authenticate or whether they decline to authenticate, this endpoint will be called with some information. So that endpoint being this right here. And as you can see, I have some to-dos because I've been kind of lazy. I haven't really finished it. This is kind of like a version, 0.0, not even beta. But anyways, so yeah, we'll see here. We are expecting to get this thing called code from the URL as an argument. And I just defined a few variables up at the top right here that we're going to be using down below. So essentially we're going to say if the auth code is truthy, so basically if we actually got something back, then we can take that auth code and go and get our access token. So in the get access token function right here, I started off by just assigning the access token to be none or null if you're in a different language. And here is the token URL. So this is the URL we will call to actually get our actual access token. And basically all I'm doing here is I'm just building up that the appropriate request. Contains a few things, right? Here we have our authorization that we're passing in from that thing that we got from the redirect URL. And there's the content type, there's the data, so that's the payload. We're just making the simple request.post to that. If it's a success, then we're able to get the access token from the response body, and that's what we'll return back. So I don't think it's too crazy, but essentially, if we got a access token back, again, we're just checking to make sure that it's truthy. If it is, then we can go ahead and do the fun stuff, right? So right here, if we do have an access token, then we can kind of begin to build up our playlist, get the users, followed artists, and do all that stuff. Right here, basically what I'm saying is the playlist name, because I'm giving the option to the user to define their own playlist name, there is the possibility that they just decide not to give a playlist name. So you'll see here, basically we're going to say, because we stored that playlist, the user's playlist name in our session, I'm grabbing it. If there is a value in that, we're just going to set that to the playlist name. But if there isn't, then I'm just grabbing the default playlist name, which was defined up here. And basically I just, called it my artist top hits and then the year. So not too important there. But then once we have that, we start doing the rest of our stuff. So in order to create a playlist and get the user's artist, first we start off by getting the user's ID. So that's their Spotify ID. I don't know if I should go into every single function, but here's the user ID. It's very simple. Again, we start off with the blank user ID, and we call this endpoint right here. And this endpoint, we pass in the headers. We do a request. If the response code is not 200, we have some safeties for it. But if the response code is 200, we're just getting the ID from the response body and return it back up. And here, funny story, in the documentation, it says that if there is an error when calling this endpoint, that there should be an error object in the body, but sometimes it doesn't return a body. It just doesn't return anything at all. It'll just return a plain text, which is why I have like this little weird conditional handling right here. But anyways, I digress. So yeah, like I said, we get the user ID. And then next we get the user's artist, and I don't think I'm going to show this. Again, I'll just leave this in my GitHub repository. Feel free to look at it and take it apart, do whatever you want with it. So yeah, we get the user's artist, we start up there, and then basically I'm checking to make sure that they actually follow some artists, because if they don't follow any artist, then this playlist generator thing has nothing to do. So if they do have artists that they're following, then we're getting the top hits. And I guess I'll actually go into this because I kind of forgot how we're doing the top hits thing. So yeah, the top hits function here, still passing in the access token because we need to pass that in with every single request we're making. Here are the artist IDs that we got from that the user's following, and here is the URL. So yeah, we're just passing in the artist. Basically, for each artist ID or each artist that the user's following, we're going to make a request, and it looks like, yeah, so I guess markets is, yeah, so it expects to receive a so top tracks can vary depending on the the locale where you are. So in the US, top artist, an artist might have different top hits from those of Europe. So yeah, this URL requires you to define which top hits from which country. So in this case, we're based in the US, so we're just doing US, right? And I'm pretty sure, but it's been a while, but I'm pretty sure I want to say that it returns 10 by default. It could be wrong, but yeah, I want to say it returns 10 tracks by default. So yeah, once we have all that, basically we're just going to be storing those tracks, or rather, we store the response in this tracks variable right here, and then we iterate through that tracks. And basically all I'm interested in is getting the URI, because that will be important for putting it into the playlist later. The URI is the identifier for that actual track that Spotify has. Okay, I know I'm explaining this very poorly, but moving along. So going back up here, once we have the artist top hits, here is where we create our top hits playlist. So again, I guess I'll go into the definition. So here, again, this is the URL for creating a playlist, and we're just building up the request itself. And this one's pretty simple, right? We just have to, when creating the URL, we just have to tell it which user we're creating the playlist for, and then that's pretty much all there is to it. So moving back up, once we have the top hits playlist ID, we're just doing another check. So basically now we're going to check if we actually have songs and we have an ID for that playlist, then we're going to add those songs to that playlist we just created. And here is the function right here. So again, here is the request, here is the header for that request. I have two lists or arrays, I forget what Python calls them, one for URIs and one for errors, and basically we're just going to iterate through that top hits list we received. And basically what I'm going to do, and as I put a comment right here because I kind of had already forgotten, this request or this URL, we can only send at most 100 tracks at a time. So you can think, if the user's following a bunch of artists, it's possible that there might be hundreds or thousands of songs that we want to add to this playlist, right? So I basically just wrote some logic to batch them up in terms of 100 and then redo the request again. So you see here we're iterating through that top hits, and I did the enumerate thing so I can get the index for it. And basically we're just going to append that top hit to our URIs list right here, and then we do our check, right? So we're going to say if there are more than 99 URIs in that list, so essentially once it gets to 100, or this right here, basically signifying that we reached the end of our top hits list, then we want to make the request to that endpoint to push those songs into our playlist, and it will just kind of keep iterating through. And again, I have some to-dos here. Perhaps we want to add a retry mechanism because networks can fail, requests can fail, all that type of stuff. Again, this is just a personal project, so it doesn't really matter that much. But anyways, so at the end, we just return the errors if there are any errors to be had, and we are good to go from there. So kind of wrapping it up here, in the end, this, like I said, returns that errors thing. Kind of ignore these comments. This was for testing purposes. And at the end of this, I'm just storing a bunch of stuff in the session. So this thing called isCallback equals true, that basically is saying I wanted to have rather some simple validation, kind of in the sense, what if we have a no good user that's trying to access endpoints that they shouldn't be accessing, right? So this callback thing will only be set to true if Spotify actually called the callback for it, right? And I'm sure that's not perfect. I'm sure it's very easy to step over that, but anyways. So aside from that, we're saying if the user allowed the authentication, set to true, valid access token set to true, the playlist name, the number of artists, the songs to be added, and if there were any errors encountered. And then once we have all that, we're just redirecting back to the generated playlist right here, endpoint, which is this little endpoint right here. And essentially all this is doing, if we ignore the to do because I haven't done any of that, we're saying if we actually did get a callback, or we went into the callback because Spotify did the redirect for us, then we're going to just render our index.html, and then we're going to pass in all these variables back into our HTML, and this kind of just controls what the user can kind of see at any given point. Going into the HTML, I kind of don't want to go into because this is very ugly code, but yeah, here's the title, the Spotify top hits playlist. Here's the little description that we talked about. Here's that meme, the Drake approves writing code meme. Here's the form with the little generate top hits playlist button. Again, there's just a lot of conditional logic to show, kind of a few things. If the user didn't allow access, we kind of just tell them, that you didn't give us access. And I guess instead of kind of going through the HTML, because that's kind of boring, we can kind of just go through this in real life. So what I'm going to do is let's jump back into my Spotify account, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my account, and what I want to do is go into apps right here, and we're going to just remove access. So that should force, or rather next time the user wants to use the app, we'll have to re-authenticate, right? So if we go back here, I'm going to just generate another playlist and refresh it. And here, let's just type in another name. So we'll say like test 2. We'll hit generate top hits playlist, and you see here that now we have to authenticate again, right? So, and this time we're gonna say no, we don't want to authenticate. So it canceled. Spotify still calls that redirect for us, and because of those variables that we had put into our session, now you see this slightly different thing right here is suspicious fry, basically saying that you didn't give the dumb Python program access to your Spotify account. So that's kind of sus. And of course we can hit the retry button and you can kind of do the whole thing all over again, right? So, but yeah, that's pretty much the Spotify top hits playlist generator in a nutshell. And yeah, with that, we have the dumb Python Spotify playlist generator that can really only create one type of playlist, but it actually works, right? And yeah, I think that's a good start to me finally finishing a project that I haven't really done in a few months or years. I don't even know at this point. But anyways, so yeah, kind of to wrap it up, I'm thinking that I'll probably make it better in the future somehow, perhaps by letting the user choose the genres or removing some songs before the playlist is created. I don't really know yet, but we'll see. Feel free to let me know if you guys have any suggestions, or feel free to do it yourselves. Like I said, the link to the GitHub repo will be in the description box below. And yeah, with that said, I know that this is a bit different than the type of content I usually put out, but I was kind of feeling a bit bored with all the Salesforce tutorial videos I've been making, and I kind of been wanting to make something a little bit different. So I really hope you guys enjoy this video. I might make more of this type of stuff depending on if you guys enjoy it or if I'm not feeling too lazy. We'll see. But anyways, consider subscribing or liking the video if you're into that type of thing, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.